An industrial accident. Every year, 500 people are killed in Britain's factories and workplaces. Most of the deaths are avoidable. Every year, at least another 2,000 die from industrial diseases. Most of these deaths could also be avoided.
You come down from there, because things aren't right on that scaffold you're on.
A factory inspector at work. Without them, the toll of death and injury would be higher. Now, despite the recession, accidents at work are increasing, and inspectors feel that their role is being undermined by government policy.
Two boards there. The other thing that's wrong with this scaffold, look at that broken end off there, it's sticking out. You've got a trapped end on that.
Factory inspectors are part of the civil service. Their function is to take away some freedoms to protect others. They intervene in industry and impose the law. Since the 1970s, a powerful lobby has set out to reduce government regulation of industry, copying America, where the inspection system has been dismantled. Now, Britain's factory inspectors are worried about their ability to prevent accidents. Their anxieties have been deepened by new thinking in government policy on industrial safety.
I think the philosophy entirely derives from the political attitudes of this government. Those attitudes involve deregulation in every area, an attempt to go back to Victorian values where the whole philosophy of the marketplace dictates completely. And in safety matters, we are not prepared to accept that the marketplace dictates.
Tonight, World in Action looks at some of Britain's high-risk industries and examines a crisis in industrial safety policy. Industry in Victorian Britain. Working conditions were often appalling. The first factory inspectors tried to enforce laws which employers often defied, preferring to run their businesses as they chose. Since Victorian times, great improvements have been made, but they've been accompanied by new problems. The inspectorate has always felt it was denied the necessary numbers needed to enforce the safety laws properly. In 1974, a major reform, the Health and Safety at Work Act, was passed. It set up the Health and Safety Executive to take on wide responsibilities in a drive against pollution and danger at work. All political parties supported the new law, but since then, the factory inspectorate has had to fall in line with a new policy of cutbacks in the civil service. Stephen Grant was the Scottish director of the HSE in the years which followed the 1974 Act. Now retired, he feels that the cuts have undermined the aspirations of the mid-1970s.
The intention was, of course, that the number of inspectors would be increased, actually, to meet the increasing demands on them. Now, instead of that, the inspectorate has been cut, and the number of inspectors has gone down. Everything is going down. All the indicators, if you look at what I would call the safety economy, all the indicators are showing up detrimentally. The number of visits per inspector has gone down. The number of sites per inspector has gone up dramatically. And the number of prosecutions is going down. The number of fatal accidents tends to be going up. So all your indicators are going the wrong way in terms of health and safety at the moment. And I think it's a pretty desperate situation.
Factory inspectors cannot speak publicly because they are bound by the Official Secrets Act, a law meant to cover only state security. But their internal reports are unequivocal. Thousands of factories are unregistered and never inspected. Inspectors are being told not to enforce some safety laws. Other new regulations are meaningless because there is insufficient staff to enforce them. Access to information is being further restricted. The Occupational Health Service is going steadily downhill. Some farms are being inspected once in every 16 years. The cutbacks are designed not only to save money, but also to change the way in which government regulates industry. In 1981, a white paper called Lifting the Burden introduced a new word into the British political vocabulary: deregulation.
Where, in your view, does the push for deregulation begin?
Well, it's partly that inspection has got drastically behind, but it's also partly, I think, a political fashion at the moment, imported from the States, I would say, where for some years now they have been actively deregulating and not intervening. so that you get a situation where you have excellent laws, but nobody, in fact, needs to comply with them.
In March this year, the Government Health and Safety Executive published an important policy document, the Plan of Work. The cornerstone of the new thinking is an idea called safety assurance. This means pulling independent factory inspectors out of some sites and leaving safety to the companies themselves. The inspectors would then only monitor information provided by the companies. John Rimington is the Director General of the HSE. He's the man who's guiding the new policy.
The plan of work deals, first of all, with what's going to happen over the next 2 years, and then the Commission asked itself, well, what about the next 10? Are there any ideas that we can put forward now for consultation which could conceivably change the general direction in which we move and help us to get the main actors in the safety system as a whole moving properly? Now, the main actor in the safety system are employers themselves. And the idea of safety assurance really is to go in there, get them moving at the highest possible level and see whether one can reach arrangements with them which would enable one to concentrate one's activities on other firms who are not so good.
The new policy of safety regulation by arrangement with employers has already been put to the test in the construction industry. An experiment was devised in secret between the HSE and the Costain Building Company, and it offers an insight into how the new safety arrangements might operate. Costain had given assurances to the HSE that their own staff would look after safety. What's your view of the Costain experiment?
It stems precisely from the culture within which the plan of work itself originated. It was a deliberate attempt to put into practice some aspect of the plan of work in total secrecy, without discussing it with anybody or consulting with anybody, and it was doing it in an industry which has an appalling safety record.
The origins of the Costain experiment lie in a visit to America by this man, Jim Hammer, then Britain's Chief Inspector of Factories. The American construction company Bechtel were building a nuclear power station near Los Angeles. As part of the Californian push for deregulation, it was agreed that they would be exempt from safety laws. The interest of the British HSE was aroused by the Bechtel deal, and Mr. Hammer set about arranging a pilot scheme for self-regulation by British construction companies. In October last year, the 6-month Costain trial began. Inspectors were withdrawn, leaving Costain to look after their own sites. This is the grave in South Wales of Terry Jarvis, who was killed on one of them. Mr. Jarvis was married with 2 children. Mr. Jarvis's life ended here, at a British Home Stores building site in Hull, which came under the terms of the Costain agreement. He was working for a subcontractor up on the girders of an extension to the store. In January, Mr. Jarvis fell 20 feet to his death. 7 hours before Mr. Jarvis was killed, one of his colleagues, Mark Reimer, also fell while doing the same job on the same building. Work continued in the same way after he was taken to hospital.
We were laying the deck, laying the floors on the building, on the steel structure, and studding on top for the concrete to be poured in.
You were laying steel sheets across the beams, were you, to make the floors?
That's right, yeah.
Was there anything unusual about that job that you noticed?
Well, the sheets were shorter than we normally had them. Normally they'd span over about 3 or 4 beams at a time, whereas they only went from one beam to another. There was no intermediate beams this time.
They only stretched across 2 beams instead of more beams?
That's right, yeah.
Would that make it easier to fall between the beams?
A lot easier, yes.
And did you fall between the beams?
I did, yes. I fell through the beams and landed on another floor.
Did you know that some hours before the death of Mr. Jarvis at Hull, another man fell from exactly the same building and narrowly escaped death?
Well,
did you know that?
in point of fact, yes, I did know that. But sadly, these things do happen in the construction industry, and they can happen anywhere, even in a relatively well-regulated firm like Costain.
Yes, and the point of inspection is to try and minimise the risk of that. As far as you know, was there a Costain safety officer on that site?
As far as I know, on that particular day, no.
What would be your reaction to learn that the government health and safety executive had arranged with Costain to withdraw factory inspectors from their sites as a sort of experiment?
I would think it was a bit irresponsible, you know, not a very good idea.
I understand that there are arrangements in tow for 2 similar experiments with construction companies. Will these go ahead in the light of the Costain deal?
They won't go ahead in the light of the Costain deal, no. Not because the Costain experiment itself was not, on the whole, successful, and we haven't learned a great deal from it, but because, as you perfectly rightly say, that kind of incident gets treated out of its true proportion and does make it very difficult to proceed with experiments of that kind.
What is the point of withdrawing or greatly reducing factory inspections in an industry like construction?
Yes. Well, what they actually did was to do a blitz on demolition, which is just about the most dangerous part of construction. And I think what Cognac, and that is to say the committee I spoke of, and the construction inspectors wanted to do was to free some resource for that blitz.
Well, it was quite a risky industry to choose to take inspectors out of, isn't it?
Well, we have so many inspectors who deal with construction, and if you want to do a blitz in one sector, then you have to reduce inspection elsewhere.
One of the reasons for taking inspectors out of Costain building sites was to free them for a blitz on the demolition industry. Doesn't that sound worthwhile?
All that does is make the point that we've been making over and over again, that there aren't enough factory inspectors. And in order to cover that problem, the health and safety executive and the government are dressing it all up in a mantle of policy. The reality is there aren't enough factory inspectors, and they make that point specifically when they say they were diverting them to another area.
The HSE's policy of taking from Peter to pay Paul is not confined to the construction industry.
Nuclear industry is clearly the one industry in the public perception where they see the potential for a major catastrophe affecting the whole of the public and not simply the people who work on the site. It is in that industry, above all other industries, that the safety regulations are policed and enforced without any margin of error. We simply have an inspectorate who are understaffed and underpaid for the job which they do. A group of people who are highly motivated, highly committed and do a superb job, but are not being given the resources and the tools to do that job effectively.
The government wants to adopt American pressurised water reactors for Britain's nuclear industry. The first of these would be built alongside an old reactor at Sizewell, where an extensive inquiry is concluding.
The Sizewell inquiry has inevitably meant substantial resources have been diverted from the normal inspectorate work to the Sizewell programme itself. Given the limited resources that we've already got, there has been inevitably a reduction in the amount of routine work which has been done by the inspectorate.
And what effect has that had on other jobs?
Well, inevitably, with a quarter of the inspectorate involved in Sizewell, it's a quarter of the work which otherwise would have been done has simply not been done for 3 years.
Inspectors at the Royal Navy Research Reactor in Greenwich summarised the situation in November 1983.
It was unlikely that the NII would have the resources to inspect the reactor under the Health and Safety at Work Act before the end of the Sizewell inquiry.
Britain's older nuclear reactors were not built to modern safety standards and need a thorough check after 20 years. This early reactor at Bradwell had run its term by 1982, but 3 years later the review still is not finished.
The older Magnox nuclear reactors, of which there are 9, 4 of them are now 20 years old or more, and the others are close to 20 years old. The nuclear inspectorate themselves insisted that the older power stations should have a full safety review at 20 years. That safety review was begun, but in fact the pressure of work in other areas has diverted the inspectorate from the 20-year review, and it is not currently taking place.
When are these reviews going to happen?
Whenever the inspectorate can get round to doing it.
Torness Power Station near Edinburgh, and a different problem. Torness is one of 2 new stations where the uranium fuel rods will be loaded next year. A full safety review of all its complex details should be a matter of course. But the inspectors say they won't be able to do a full safety check.
The current position as far as Torness, for example, is concerned is that sometime in 1986 the station is to be fuel loaded. This means that between now and then the inspectorate has its last chance to vet the whole safety case as far as the station is concerned. They have been told themselves that to do that effectively they would require 3 times the staff that they currently have on the job.
Who told them that?
This information came from senior levels of management.
That sounds as though they're going to be able to do a third of the work.
It sounds precisely that, and it is extremely worrying.
One solution to the general shortage of inspectors has been to use private consultants and people borrowed from other parts of the nuclear industry. But a letter written in 1982 by the chief nuclear inspector, Ron Anthony, warned that the policy was having a disturbing effect.
Our dependence on outside support has reached the point where our independence could be called into question.
In March 1985, the government's own Advisory Committee on the Safety of Nuclear Installations discussed the disquiet in the 4 branches of the Nuclear Inspectorate. The head of Branch 1 reported that resources were strained. The head of Branch 2 reported his division was under-resourced. In Branch 3, which should be looking at nuclear waste disposal, resources were strained to the limit and inadequate to take on any additional work. In Branch 4, there was a shortage of staff, and inspectors had not been able to continue producing an important safety guide. One of the people at the meeting which heard these reports was the HSE Director General, John Rimington. Some nuclear inspectors have told us that they think the inspectorate of our nuclear power stations is understaffed by between 20 and 50%. What's your view of that concern?
How do they make that calculation? I think we do need more nuclear inspectors. We're recruiting more at the moment. There are actually more inspectors in the Nuclear Inspectorate at the moment than there have ever been before, so that our efforts to recruit more inspectors have actually been yielding some fruit.
I mean, the inspectors believe, for instance, that they won't be able to do such a thorough safety review at the new reactors, Torness and Heysham, as they'd like to. Are you confident that they'll manage all the same, or would you share that concern?
No, I wouldn't share that kind of concern. We simply wouldn't allow that to happen. It's quite essential that the new AGR stations are properly brought in, properly commissioned, properly assessed.
Isn't it a bit unnerving that they feel they might not be able to do it quite as efficiently and thoroughly and rigorously as they feel they'd like to?
Well, naturally they voiced those fears, and I'm glad they voiced those fears. But all I can say is that we would not allow such an important matter to fall behind.
The view of the inspectors themselves is that they are grossly understaffed, that they're unable to do the work which they believe is necessary to do in the nuclear industry, and that they are highly frustrated by their inability to do that work.
If the HSE goes ahead with self-regulation under the plan of work, then it is companies like May and Baker which would have to carry out the scheme. Here in Norwich, the company makes drugs, pesticides and herbicides. May and Baker use a range of highly toxic chemicals and potent drugs which can affect health. One important product was recently listed as potentially damaging to human reproduction and put on restricted sale. The company has a well-developed safety policy of the kind the HSE would require for self-regulation. The safety system appears to be a good one. In its policy documents, the company pledges to devote as much attention and effort to safeguarding health and safety in all its activities as it does to matters of economy and productivity. But there is a gap between promise and performance. There is pollution both over Norwich and in the factory itself.
We refer to it as a cocktail. It's really a mixture of various chemicals, dusts. These are built up over a period of time because no one building concentrates on any one chemical. And the nature of the workplace is that it's an absolute jungle of pipes and vessels and landings and rafters and beams and girders, which are more or less impossible to keep clean.
Workers at the factory have become more anxious about their health after 5 employees in one section developed cancers.
Earlier this year, one evening I got a telephone call at home from a lady who was in fact the widow of one of our colleagues who we'd lost earlier this year. And she expressed grave concern about the site in general, particular production area where her husband was employed. And her comment to me over the telephone was that I know that you're not really in a position to do anything for me personally, but my concern is for the people, in fact, who are still employed there, who have responsibilities and young families. Let's hope that the working environment can be cleaned up.
We wanted to film conditions inside the factory and interview a director from May and Baker. Both requests were declined. But under the present safety system, factory inspectors visit the plant regularly. Their correspondence with May and Baker shows the defects in safety which regular inspection can identify. 16.9.81.
Emergency water supply could not be turned on.
14.4.83.
Exhaust ventilation was of a poor design and wouldn't lend itself to the efficient collection of any fume.
15.4.83.
Hydrochloric acid tanks may be subject to sudden and catastrophic failure.
19.7.83.
Maintenance is often carried out on the basis of a first aid and firefighting approach.
22.11.84.
Accident to Mr. Bramble. Your in-house investigation contains many errors.
February 85.
Crucial health and safety aspects were noticeable by their absence.
We showed the May and Baker file to a former factory inspector. Ted Rushworth retired from the inspectorate to specialise in occupational health.
It's a fairly typical chemical factory in actual fact. There's a whole list of things which have been found wrong, and this is fairly typical.
So, do you think things could be improved there?
Oh, they certainly could. I noticed there's one particular letter here, you see, where really it has it in a nutshell, I think. He's saying, your management have not always considered health and safety aspects to be of a similar weight to those of production and the other needs of the company. I mean, that's the point that I've been making, that, you know, health and safety does take second place, and you do need an inspectorate who is going to try and push that into first place.
Now, under the plan of work, the inspectors could be taken out and used to audit the safety policy rather than inspect the plant. Do you think that would be a good thing?
I don't, no. You cannot abandon basic inspection. You've got to be in touch with the grassroots, and that's where inspectors get it. If they start dealing by knocking at the front door and just going into the managing director's office to chat over about the safety policy, it'd be a waste of time.
Why do you think that your inspectors are, in the main, hostile to safety assurance?
I don't think the inspectors are hostile to safety assurance. Some are, of course. There are always voices and divisions of opinion when proposals of this kind are made. But I think some of the hostility that some inspectors have expressed has been based on the idea that the Commission were inventing a device for reducing the number of inspectors further. Now, that was very far from their intentions.
Will you be arguing for more factory inspectors in the field?
Well, I have to point out that factory inspectors cost taxpayers money. And before I argue for more, I've got to be very clear that I'm using the ones I've got as effectively as possible.
Privately, even the top executives at the HSE now acknowledge the scale of opposition to the plan of work and the validity of many objections. This confidential briefing by Deputy Director Jim Hammer identifies a range of serious problems. Among them, the difficulty of finding firms whose standards merit HSE's confidence. Mr. Hammer's paper also concedes that the potential for saving resources is very limited. I believe you had some figures analysed in the West Midlands and found that the savings and redirecting of resources were very limited. And it was then proposed that the acid test for safety assurance was whether or not you would continue with it even if the resources redeployed were minimal.
Yes.
What do you mean, acid test?
Well, I mean exactly what I say. That's the test. Does safety assurance actually conduce to more safety? If I had any doubts about it, and believe me, there are an awful lot of people besides myself who'd have to have no doubts about it, we won't go ahead with it. And if we did start it and we found in any way that it was not performing satisfactorily or was not a cost-effective way of going on, we'd drop it.
So do you think the push for deregulation will achieve anything in the safety field?
Oh yes, it'll make accidents go up, I would say, and health problems will increase. It's the opposite of what I would like to see.